Hello, my name's Jorb. I love gear. That includes the sequential circuit Six-Trak, which I recently repaired. I'm going to walk you through the whole process of repairing it. That's what this video is going to be about. I'm not going to talk about the synth itself. It'll get its own video later. And I'm going to try this format where I film myself talking head style and I splice in clips where I play music or do little things. I think that might be my style primarily going forward, and I just want to keep getting better at it. If you came here because you have a broken Six-Trak and you're trying to solve it, welcome. I hope this helps you. If you're subscribed to me, hey, thanks for coming back and watching this, even if it's not that relevant to you. But if you're not subscribed, which is most of you, you probably found this by browsing or searching. I encourage you to look around this channel, see if anything else interests you. I talk about all the gear I own and how much I paid. If you're a deal hunter like myself, it includes things like broken Six-Traks, which maybe you bought and now you're looking for some resources. I'd really appreciate it if you click subscribe. You don't have to ring the bell. I don't ring the bell for anybody, but I'd appreciate it if you click subscribe. But if you like what I'm talking about, and like what you see, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe. So let's get into the real fucking information on we're trying to sell my fucking channel. Jesus Christ. So I paid $535 for this on Reverb. I knew it was broken. Reverb description wasn't super detailed, but says it currently programs and plays but cannot save patches. Every time you turn it on, you're back to a straight sawtooth wave. So every time you play it, it's kind of like a clean slate to find a new sound. Really fun way to say it's not working. But I knew it wasn't working, so not a problem. I got it to load SysX when it was still in that state, and so I could play the original patches, which was great. But the first thing I noticed is they didn't sound quite right, and I have a phone video of that, which will be playing next to me. First of all, it does this. It's not evenly cyclical. I'm not sure what it is, but I think I'm gonna have to start measuring some power supply stuff. And if I power cycle the unit, then the memory doesn't stay at all. And the battery totally tested fine. And so I would load SysX again, play around and listen. And even though I had the patches working, it had that sort of non-cyclical pulsing sort of modulation, whatever you want to think of it as, problem with the voices. And so now I'm looking for multiple things, okay? And I started with the battery first, and I tested it in circuit, and it seemed close to 3 volts, but I know sometimes testing components in circuit isn't super reliable. I can't think of a scenario where a battery would read a higher voltage. You would expect it to be lower if being in circuit drew something, but I wasn't sure, and they're 2 big pads of solder. So I took it out, measured it out of circuit, and I got 3 volts. So I knew it was a good battery, and that was consistent with what I'd heard from the seller. Not to say I didn't trust them, but I like to do these things on my own. So I put the battery back in, and then I started looking around the board. In particular, now that I knew the voices had problems in relation to them. And so I know I have some photos and maybe some videos. It's kind of hard to capture good angles of it. A lot of these capacitors were leaking electrolytic fluid, electrolytes, whatever. I don't know if they're actually electrolytes, but it's what plants crave. And the legs get kind of corroded. And that's super common in old synthesizers. Recapping is a common piece of maintenance on all these things. And so I went through and I found all the ones that looked corroded. And if there were any components that looked fine, but they matched exactly another one that was, I took it out as well. And so that left me with essentially 1 per voice and a bunch of others scattered around. So you're probably watching footage of me desoldering those right now. One of the things I started doing, because I'm not super technical, and I like to set myself up to not fail as best as possible, I'll take a rectangular piece of cardboard and tape the capacitors I took out and plan to replace in the relative shape on this piece of cardboard, where I found them in the keyboard. And so you should see me holding it up to screen right now, but I drew out where the battery was as a point of reference and taped down these capacitors with the orientation in the place they were so I wouldn't forget when I was coming in to replace, etc., etc. I also took pictures of the board before I did anything. And then I can see orientation of the capacitors even if I don't tape them down quite right, and I have a starting point. This is what it looked like before I changed anything. And then if something isn't working later, I make sure I have my capacitors oriented correctly. I make sure that, I didn't knock something else or bend a leg until a resistor broke or anything. I just have a good reference now, okay? I ordered new parts on DigiKey. I don't know if you guys have used that. I've started to like it better. They have better options in ordering than a place like Taida. and it's easier for me to use their website than a place like Mouser, and I think they have more sustainable packaging, which is always nice. And they got here not too much later, and I installed what I could, but in a classic I was working too fast problem, I needed capacitors rated for 16 volts, and I bought capacitors rated for 160 volts. So you can see here, they're just physically much too big to fit into the spots on the SixTrak that it needed to fit in, which set me back, about another week for another order from DigiKey, which is okay. When you're buying components, there's a lot of things that you need to get right. With these capacitors, you need to have the same capacitance, which is in farads or microfarads. You need to have at least the same voltage. You can be a higher voltage, but not a lower voltage. And so a lot of these were rated for 16 volts. And so if I couldn't find one for 16 volts, anything higher than that would be okay if it would fit in the same space, and my 160 volt ones would not. They need to be the same mounting type. These are through-hole components. They are not surface mount. I don't think I've seen any lugged capacitors, but they may exist. But these are through-hole, which means they're just plain metal legs on either side, and they're intended to be soldered into a circuit board. And the leads on this capacitor are axial, so they're in the tops and the bottoms. It's not, I don't know, a can type is all I can think of right now, but I'll put in text whatever they're actually called. Where the positive and negative leads are both on one end. But I installed what I could then, and I desoldered all the holes. I used a solder sucker. I heated up on one side, and I pumped the solder sucker on the opposite side to get everything out and have a clean throughway for the hole for when I get the new components. Finally showed up. I installed them. SysX loaded fine, just like it had been. Let's go. And I didn't have that problem with the voices. Everything sounded the way it should, in tune, modulating the way it should, and the patches all sounded good, but I was still having problems with it keeping patch memory. And this is where things get a little strange. So I had it out on the board loose in the case, okay? And I loaded SysX, and I turned it off, and I waited for a while, and I turned it back on, and it was fine. It kept the patches. And so I thought, okay, I'm done. I did everything I need to do, and I put the board back into the case, and I had the same problem again. The way you can tell on the SixTrak, if you don't have your patch memory saved, it'll count 1 through 6, because it's tuning all 6 voices, because part of what gets saved in memory is a tuning value for every voice. And so if you see it count 1 through 6, it means your patch memory isn't there, which you can also find out as soon as you get your patches, but that's an easy way to know, okay, this is not behaving the way it should. And so to me, what's changing between when this is loose in the board and I stick it up in the case and screw everything down? And so there's different tensions on the board, there's different flexing on the board. Maybe there's a hairline crack that I'm exposing or pinching that is, close enough that the solder joints are making contact in one state, and far enough away that they aren't in another. And so I started just physically inspecting the board from the battery, following any of the traces, starting at the RAM, following any of the traces. And here's a photo of what I did find, which was like a tiny hairline crack, kind of close to the RAM. I wasn't sure that was part of my problem, but I knew I had to fix it. So I reflowed that solder just across that one little hairline crack. I don't know what could have caused that. Maybe when the previous tech was in here, an errant screwdriver, or who knows, but reflowed that solder, and then that seemed to be my problem solved. And so I had it loose in the case, and I checked it, and I unplugged it from the wall, let it sit for a while. The patches persisted. I put it back into the case, and the patches were there, and I turned it off for a while, unplugged it from the wall, left it for a day, left it for 2 days, plugged it in, and it seems like we're good. So my goal in this is somebody with the exact same problem can follow similar steps, and I'm not saying that the exact trace is going to be cut on your SixTrak. I'm saying that I sort of want to share my process of I know to do this, and then if that doesn't work, take another step, and take another step, and take another step. So the things I knew to do are change and check the battery, and I tried to do that even though the seller told me I might not have to. I know to look for bad electrolytic capacitors, and I know to look for broken traces. Those are things that I've experienced on the Poly 6s that I fixed, and the EX800 and the JX3P, and all these steps, all these problem-solving paths are shared throughout a lot of synthesizers. And so even if you're watching this and you don't have a Six-Trak, or you don't have one that's broken, these are things you can learn and take with you and apply to other things you want to buy and fix. Because I shouldn't be the only one getting these really good deals. I want people to know that it's totally within their ability. There you go. That's this whole story kind of logged out. I'm sure you've been listening to the Six-Trak. It sounds pretty cool, if you ask me. I'm excited to treat it like an early primitive analog groove box. That's kind of probably going to be the video, the first analog groove box or something like that. So my name's been Jorb. I love gear. I love the Six-Trak. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next one. Cheers.